Yeah, I'm a bit the same.
Hello, good evening, viewers, and welcome to the WNTV Kashmir Seeks Attention. I'm your host, SM Irfan Tahir. Today, our topic is about the international perspective on Kashmir conflict. We will try to know the position of the international community regarding Kashmir conflict. Let me introduce my distinguished guest. Uh, Respectfully, Anthea McIntyre, former member of the European Parliament from 2011 to 2020, where she represents the West Midlands region. She is a businesswoman and devotes share time to a range of public and volunteer service roles in Brussels. Anthea was conservative chief whip and spoke for the Party of Employment, the Environment and Agriculture. Anthea also co-chaired the All Parties Friend of Kashmir group in the European Parliament and champions human rights and self-determination for the Kashmiri people. She visited Kashmir in 2018, meeting with ministers and civil society and visiting the line of control. So she has a lot of experience about the our today topic. Claire Bidwell, she is an human rights activist, uh, co-founder of Let Kashmir Decide, primary school teacher from Scotland. Welcome to the show. Soraya Boyd, CEO and founder, facilitate global, a London-based human rights NGO promoting peace building, conflict prevention, and conflict resolution. One rule of law. All the distinguished guests believe in human rights, peace, and justice in the world. So I will start with Anthea. Hello, Anthea. Welcome to our show. Okay, Anthea, as we know that you have been busy with Kashmir cause as a friend of Kashmir, so we would like to know about your experience. What do you think? What is the possible solution for Kashmir conflict?
Well, I think it's extremely sad, and the thought that this conflict has gone on for so many years, I think it causes great concern, certainly amongst my colleagues. And I think that the only way to resolve it is in the context of the whole world. I think you can't say that it's just a bilateral Pakistani, Indian, or even with China in there, the conflict. It's something that the whole world needs to recognize and try to solve. I thought it was encouraging when we had the UN resolution on human rights, and it made some very specific recommendations both to India and a few to Pakistan as well. And I think that was a very good step forward because it gave countries something to really get hold of. From my own experience in the European Parliament, it's not been easy to get other countries involved. It was predominantly an issue that was raised and championed by British MEPs. But interestingly, since the UK has left the EU, other members from other countries have come forward to take up the issue. And that I find extremely encouraging. So I hope that the Friends of Kashmir in the European Parliament will continue and will broaden support across the whole Parliament. I do know that the Human Rights Committee of the Parliament was looking at this much more now than it had in the past. So I'm hopeful, but we might want to come on to more of this, but I am concerned that in the current COVID crisis, it's very easy for governments of all persuasions and across the world to kind of bury issues like this. But actually now is the time to be more concerned than ever before.
Thank you so much, Anthea. We appreciate your efforts in European Parliament and UK as well. Hi, Soraya. Thank you for joining us today. We would like to know about your campaign for Palestine as well as for Kashmir. Soraya, can you
Hello,
hear me?
good evening.
Yeah.
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes. Let's play.
Lovely. So good evening, salam alaikum, and thank you so much for hosting this event. I'm delighted to be sharing this platform together with Anthea and Claire. It's always a great privilege to meet human beings who are moral individuals who really endorse and promote universal human values and principles. So that is already a super point of departure from which I am delighted to make my contribution. I would like to say that I have been campaigning on behalf of the indivisible, inalienable sovereign rights of Palestinians, being that they are also under a long-term, protracted, illegal military occupation for the last 25 odd years. And I have also worked tirelessly to establish parallels between that which happens in Palestine and that which has happened indeed in Kashmir. Now, we know that the relationship between India and Israel has strengthened. It all started off with some trade deal, and it went on to defense, military, intelligence, surveillance. We also know that as the relationship strengthened and became closer, that under Modi's watch, the policies and politics of ethnic cleansing, genocide, war crimes, house demolition, as we have seen recently, also annexation, arbitrary detention, extrajudicial killing, all of those have gone on pretty much with impunity. And it is not as though the international community doesn't know. The UN has repeatedly issued very robust reports making recommendations. I would recommend that everyone reads the 2008-2019 reports with a view to come up to date with what the UN has recommended. So we have seen that the Modi BJP RSS Hindutva has very much adopted policies of ethnic cleansing, that they are premised on ethnic settler colonial expansionists, and very much similarly to the Israelis, what they are after is the geography, not the demography. So Kashmiris, just as Palestinians, are a little bit inconvenient, and they have to be subjugated to very harsh, I would say highly discriminatory, well, completely against any kind of legal norms, international or domestic for that matter, which violate all of their human rights, from the right to life, to the right of freedom of movement, the right of information, the right to protest, the right to assemble, the right to even give birth. We all know that women in the occupied Palestinian territories many of them have tended to give birth at checkpoints. Now, of course, the situation is not quite as entrenched in Kashmir as it is in Palestine. So it is, we still have time to prevent the Palestinization of Kashmir. However, we also must be aware of the fact that civil society has been at the receiving end of all forms of, shall we say, repressive measures. And whether you happen to be a journalist, a human rights defender, you wouldn't expect any journalist, human rights defender to be detained in Britain. That would be completely unconstitutional, undemocratic, and illegal. However, Modi goes ahead with full steam arresting elected officials. Some of them have been detained for over 20 years without any due process. So that's another gross violation of any kind of legal textbook. And with Modi adopting a very much unilateral sort of decision without due consultation or even seeking the consent of the Kashmiri people, by removing their special status and instead making it a federal or union territory, which has no legitimacy whatsoever. It doesn't matter what Modi and his cohort attempt to do. It doesn't make any of what they are doing legal. Now, I am not a lawyer. I am not a human rights lawyer, and I know that, which leads me very nicely to Mr. Keir Starmer, who is by profession a human rights lawyer, although admittedly a self-avowed Zionist. Now, how on earth he reconciles human rights with being a Zionist, I really don't know. But he needs to ask himself a very profound question, particularly since human rights are said to be indivisible. So therefore, if he wants to be considered to be a prime ministerial or even leader of the Labour Party, he really ought to do some very profound soul searching. Now, my position as a member of civil society is to continue to lobby my government. I'm actually lobbying many MPs who happen not to be my MPs, and they always retort, I am not your MP, you are not my constituent. I am merely exercising my democratic right to express my concern, and I shall continue to do so to the whole constitutional parliamentarian body. So from that perspective, I think that it is quite clear that the UK also has been rather complicit in and supportive of as a result of its complacency. Up until recently, it was very much of the view that it was bilateral, internal. Now, if India referred the matter to the UN in 1947, already by then Kashmir was internationalized. With the fact that China's military intervention is now factored in, it makes it even more of an international matter, picking up on what Anthea just said a moment ago. So if I know that, if Anthea knows that, surely the whole of parliamentarians across Europe and wherever must know that too. Of course, the huge impediment is to do with trade and investment. So it seems that profits are favored over the lives of people, which again is not only just regrettable, it is criminal and really very much immoral in my view. So as long as the European Union will toe the line as far as not imposing sanctions on either Israel or the government of Modi, both Palestinians and Kashmiris will very much continue to suffer. They will suffer, and they will suffer greatly. Now, the rates of trauma, the rates associated with depression and anxiety are over 100%. Everyone, both in Palestine and Kashmir, has experienced firsthand a family member being intimidated, being violated, brutalized, arrested, even killed. And I refer to the 3-year-old recently who was within hearing range of his grandfather being shot. Now, this is just a gentleman, a civilian, who's gone out with his little grandson with a view to just have some time out and be normal, live, self-affirm, even in the most excruciating, difficult circumstances, which the military regime imposed by Modi has very much forced upon Kashmiri people, particularly in the valley. Now, the other regions may suffer, but when compared, those who are really at the receiving end are the people of the valley in Indian occupied, administered legally, that is the terminology, but nonetheless Indian occupied Kashmir. So the UN has produced lots of reports in terms of rape, in terms of all other forms of human rights violation. Journalists have been incarcerated in cells in prisons which are already more than overcrowded, and they are at risk of COVID-19. So pre-COVID-19 things were not particularly, scintillating. now they are certainly very much aggravated. So Modi will have to be made to comply, because international law, once you ratify, once you are a signatory, you can't derogate from. It is not a get out of jail clause. You're not playing Monopoly. You have to abide by the terms to which you are bound. And if no government obliges Modi, then civil society, myself and others, will continue to very much exercise our democratic right to pressure our elected or formerly elected members of parliament, with a view to help them return to their senses, moral and political, so as to do what is morally and politically and legally correct. I think I could add some more, but I think I'll give the floor over.
Yeah, I will come to you again. Thank you so much. Hello, Claire. It is great to have you in our show. Would you like to tell us about your campaign, Let Kashmiris Decide, and what is the vision behind?
Yeah, absolutely. Good afternoon. Thank you for having me on your show. And Soraya and Anthea, it's an honor to be here with you. And I think I can pick up as well in describing the campaign on both what they've said there. I mean, as Soraya said, working through governments, putting pressure on our parliaments to take it onto the international stage, as Anthea said, because it is an international matter. So Let Kashmir Decide for me came about because I learned about the situation only last August, only after the lockdown, and filled with this sense of injustice. One, on the level that this was happening, that Modi felt that he was able to go in and do that, where internationally it's illegal. And then to hear people couldn't contact their family, the troops going in, the evidence of all the abuses, the rapes, the blinding, the pellet guns, etc. And then also the injustice that I had gone through my life without really hearing about any of this conflict, because it was not within our mainstream media. So I think within that, I started going onto media sites. It was mainly at that point was MPs, and getting engaged in the discussions and the dialogue, and slowly learned. And then I met online Javad from Kotley in Azad, and we were discussing the issue, and he came up with the idea for a Facebook group where we could raise awareness. So we set that up, and then this journey then, it kind of evolved. I wanted to go to Indian occupied Kashmir and get the troops out. I was filled with this feeling of this is what I wanted to do, and I wanted to take the world with me to say, get out. It was just this. So the best we could think of was to arrange this whole world tea event, where we would go to Kashmir and we would take one member from every country of the world with us, so that they could then feed back to their countries. So essentially raising awareness in all countries around the world, so that they could then put pressure on their governments. And so a lot of the work that Let Kashmir Decide is involved with is in trying to bring the news into the Western communities, into the mainstream media. So currently, we've collected different members along the way, and where it started with 1 and then 2, we've now, we've got over 30 country representatives, and we're forming a kind of structure amongst the civil society people in the UK, so that all pro-Kashmiris come together, as one voice, and get the regional representatives. And as Soraya was saying there, lobbying all MPs, and there's a lot of work going on, within the Kashmiri diaspora that have supported us and embraced this move all the way along. And I think, the power is in uniting the people under the same ideology, instead of then where before they've gone to governments with their different ideologies. This is happening, and even possibly at the United Nations level, the United Nations is hit with arguments from all sides, from Indian perspectives, Pakistan perspectives, Kashmir perspectives, although to be fair, Kashmiris don't have that voice to go forward with. So I think just uniting all this to try and get that power to get forward, and it has become, it's a big learning journey for me, and met so many people. And I think I find myself now quite frustrated, because they talk about the international community, and then when you ask yourself, what is the international community? That is also us. So it's like everybody's standing back waiting for the other person to be the one that's going to come and do it. It's encouraging that Anthea says, since the UK have left the European Parliament, others are stepping up. So there are people here that are going to step up. But I mean, Kashmiris need a voice. Somebody needs to step forward for them, a country, a government, a person, to be their voice. And then the people, I think the people, there's a lot we can do here. But it's very frustrating having been in this campaign for 10, 11 months and things are getting worse. And now I'm asking myself, okay, where do we go now? What do we do next? Because it's not resolving, and it's illegal under international laws on the human rights perspective and the United Nations Security Council resolutions and regulations, and we need a solution.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your work, Claire. Are you doing for the Kashmiris and resolving the Kashmir conflict? Anthea, I want to come to you. We want to know your views about what people say that Kashmir conflict is unfinished agenda of partition of subcontinent. Do you think that British government can play a role to finish the unfinished agenda?
I think they should, yes. But I think it takes more than that. I think, as I said before, and I think that both Claire and Soraya agree, that it is very much an international issue. So it's not a case of harking back to sort of the times of British Empire. I think that would be a big mistake. I think that Britain, along with other countries, I think Europe needs to step up more than it's done so far. But I think it needs resolving in the context of the modern world, not going back to the days of partition. And clearly there was unfinished business from those days. I'm not trying to deny that, but I don't think that going back is the way to solve it. I think that all across the world, everyone is very keen to develop trade. And we know, while I was in the European Parliament, I spent a number of years on the delegation for relations with India. I am an admirer of India. My father was born in India. And I just feel that Kashmir is a real stain on the reputation and character of India. And I think that's what we need to persuade them, that, that India is the largest democracy in the world. It's got so much to be proud of. It's developing in all sorts of ways. And I've visited several times, and it's a great country. But I feel, from sitting in Britain, I say, yes, of course, we want to trade with India, but not at any price. And the price at the moment, and the price for quite a while, has been far too high. And we cannot stand by and say, yes, we'll have trade, and not put pressure on India to stop the occupation. And it's not, I mean, they ought to at least not allow their military to avoid all prosecutions. I think the immunity from prosecution is one of the first things that ought to be removed, because the way that the Indian troops can behave in the occupied Kashmir is appalling. And as you said, I visited a year or so ago, and I was able to talk to people with first-hand experience and people that lived near the line of control. And one man went out to pick vegetables outside his house and was shot from the other side of the valley. And all these sort of events that are quite ghastly, and they're going on now. And I feel that there is an urgency that we need to get across to other countries around the world, that we should not be allowing this to go on. I think the UN needs to step up. I do think that the power of the United Nations has not really been made enough of. And I think also we need to be able to defend some of the criticisms that come back from India. India talks about terrorism and Pakistan harbouring terrorists. And I think that Pakistan has actually got a very good case for the work it's doing against terrorism. But I think it's important that all of these things are dealt with. So it, in a way, leaves India nowhere to go. That those sorts of issues have been resolved, that the democratic nature of Pakistan, the way that Pakistan treats Christians, for example, that's been quite a big issue. And with HBB and so on, as long as those sorts of issues are not being addressed, it gives India an excuse that I don't want it to have. So I think that still we need to put pressure on from around the world. And I mean, it's not just India. There are other countries that we should not trade with because the price is too high. And we have to say that we demand higher standards. We want to see human rights protected before we're willing to trade with these various countries.
Okay, thank you so much, Soraya. If you remember, right to job and land was used against Palestine in 1996. Is the situation same today in Kashmir? What do you think about that?
Yes. So if I may just pick up where I left off. So the way that I work is by establishing closer, tighter, wider international solidarity networks with a view to close the gaps in international solidarity. So from Palestine to Kashmir, because all liberation struggles have at their basis the same factors, and which is to free themselves from the yoke of oppressive regimes, because you can't call them systems of democratic governance. So that is the way that I was going to answer your question, the question you put to me first. Now, if I may say, I think that the nation-state law in Israel is very much the same as the domicile law. So basically, if you're Palestinian, if you hold the deeds to your ancestral, property and homes, but you have been made a refugee, therefore you live in the diaspora, you have no opportunity or possibility to return home. However, if you are simply by virtue of the fact that you happen to be a Jew, you have every possible right to return to occupied Palestine. So that's the one thing. And I think what Modi is doing is, first of all, I want to make clear that there's a substantive difference between that which is Hinduism and that which is Hindutva. In my view, Hindutva is Hinduism's nemesis. And the way in which Modi has been willingly, wantonly, callously persecuting both Indians in Muslims in India and Muslims in Kashmir is already quite substantial evidence. The way that he has been persecuting Sikhs is another factual occurrence. And I'm sure that after they have persecuted the Muslims, the Sikhs, they will go after everything else, Christians, Buddhists, and obviously Hindus, because they are not secular. They certainly are not religious. So it's the same difference as Judaism, which when politicized becomes Zionism. So when Hinduism is politicized, it becomes Hindutva. So there's nothing holy in either Zionism or Hindutva. That's the first thing I want to say. Now, picking up on what Anthea said, when it comes to terrorism. Now, I happen to be French. I come from a region called Lorraine, which is right on the border with Germany. So we were first invaded by Bismarck and then thereafter by Adolf Hitler. So my region, my village is still littered with all things that remind us of the Nazi occupation. And when I was a child, the elders in the village used to gather the children and tell them about the wondrous and wonderful tribulations that they experienced as either young adolescents, young men or women. And they were all civilians. There was nothing military or paramilitary in terms of their, being ordinary members of the public. And they always said that they picked up everything and anything, stones, sticks, branches, discarded weapons, to first of all exercise their moral right to defend themselves, to resist a belligerent occupier, and to secondly defend their homeland. So my fellow countrymen, men, women, ordinary people, were and are always referred to as valiant militants. Now, that is a very positive use of the term militant. It hasn't been politicized, therefore not criminalized. And they are also remembered as members of the French resistance, and they are celebrated as freedom fighters. Now, I submit here, in terms of linguistic, let us just interchange, remove French freedom fighters and put in their stead Palestinian, Kashmiris, Algerian, South African. All of those people were fighting to self-determine. All of those people, all of those liberation struggles were resisting the occupation. The French resisted the Nazis, the Algerian resisted the French, the South Africans resisted the Afrikaners, the Palestinians are resisting the Zionists, and Kashmiris are resisting RSS, BJP, Hindutva. So that's a major difference also. So people have a moral, which is sovereign, inalienable, indivisible moral right. They have a political right, and they have a legal right, which is enshrined in international law, that states quite clearly, categorically, that people have the right to resist by any which way they choose, either through peaceful resistance or armed resistance. Now, we have seen that both in the case of Israel and in the case of Modi's regime. It doesn't really matter if you are peaceful or armed. You just simply get to be disposed of because you are inconvenient and because they want to absolutely impose their own nationalistic systems of rule. Now, I have a bit of a bone of contention here with my lovely newly met friend, I hope, Anthea, and that is to say that we need to get our discourse and language right. There is nothing remotely associated with anything being an act of terrorism. When people exercise their moral, legal, political right to resist, they cannot be possibly then qualified as terrorists. And frankly, the only form of terrorism that we are witnessing is that which is state imposed, whether in Palestine or in Kashmir. So we need to be very, very factual about that. The other thing that I somewhat slightly cannot bring myself to agree with Anthea is that Britain has a historic responsibility both in Palestine and in Kashmir. And as part of the reconciliation process, I think that Britain ought to really demonstrate political maturity by indeed showing more than a demonstrable willingness in terms of the political affirmation of it assuming its historic responsibility, and that is to say, to engage substantively in the process of bringing the peaceful, negotiated settlement between all parties involved. And in Palestine, that does indeed mean all Palestinians. And in Kashmir, it means all Kashmiris. Britain should really stop paying lip service, deplore, merely condemn and urge. It really needs to get its act together and do something really that is memorable and historically, that will go historically in the annals of history as having finally stood up and done the right thing, having done so many wrong things prior to that. Finally, all I want to say is that both Britain, being members of the UN, and I know we no longer are a member of the EU, but the EU has a mandate, and that mandate is to promote and protect the promotion and protection of human rights. And they really ought to also factor in the UN guiding principles on business and human rights. So they have more than enough to take up in order to really demonstrate that they value the lives of people and work to promote not just national self-interest, but the interest of the world's committee and community of people. I think I'll stop there.
Thank you so much. You are absolutely right. Okay, Claire, how will you influence international community to end the 72 years suffrage of Kashmiris?
Oh, sorry, I didn't quite catch the first bit. How would I influence the international community? Was that your question?
Yeah. How will you influence international community to end the 72 years suffrage of Kashmiris?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just bringing out the awareness of all that is there, and sharing that out wide. I like to feel that a lot of people haven't known or aren't aware, and therefore, if we bring those issues out on the human level, as Soraya mentioned earlier, the granddad there, you know, the other day, and his child sitting on his chest, that must have touched every human being's heart if they knew. And so I feel that we are really up against a lot here. To my knowledge, I have not heard Boris Johnson even condemn the actions of the Indian government. So where we are here hopeful for sanctions against India, or even in the new trade deals where they bring in human rights issues to that, it's like we're really up against it. And somebody mentioned yesterday, I think actually it was an ex-European member of Parliament again, about how things could change if Donald Trump was elected out and we had a new president. And for me, you know, the elections are in November and it's July. And I was on two levels like, well, we can't wait till November for an action. And then on another level, why are we so reliant on a few people? Why is the whole world so reliant on a few people to tell us what's happening and not upholding these laws? So we have got the United Nations, which is meant to be functional. So by raising that, you know, onto the international stage, why isn't the United Nations acting? So that takes you then into the main countries that run United Nations. So they need to be key in getting the mechanisms going within that. At the moment, you know, we saw Trump go to India and shake hands with Modi while there was chaos going on the street. And so as a world international community, I see us in trouble. Because, you know, it's not just in Kashmir, it's happening in all the places that Soraya mentioned. And another one where I know is going extreme right now is Libya. So this is getting worse and worse. For me, my own personal feeling is the way forward for world peace, as it were, and human rights and justice. I feel as though that's within Kashmir, because we need to get the United Nations moving. We need to really, I want to say kick, I don't know what the right word is, put pressure on our world leaders to make it function, to make it happen. What India are doing to civilians, if you bring it onto a human term, you think about your everyday, you know, life, and they're being killed, they're being raped, they're being tortured, it's massive. And this shouldn't be allowed to happen. And I think, you know, we, like I said on my last thing, we are the international community as well. So this is on all our doors, that we're allowing people to be hurt. So for me, it's trying to get that message out there as strongly as possible, that as a world community, we're not going to have this. And I think, you know, that we need to bring more people to this to really pressure our world leaders, because it just shouldn't, life just shouldn't be like that. You know, we get one life only. Why should people live their lives like that? And, you know, the suffering all around the world, the people that have got family there, that have got friends there, you know, we're living with all types of abuse, mental abuse, you know. And to me, the world needs to work harder, it needs to work faster, and it needs to work quicker. And I just don't think it's good enough to sit back. And this is all at Modi's door. As Anthea said, you know, India itself, it's such a vibrant, colourful, wonderful country. He's destroying it all. He's destroying the vibrancy. He's destroying his own citizens, you know, and there are plenty of Indians within India that are standing up against him, want to rise up against him. So this is about Modi. This is about the BJP government within Kashmir, but it's also about the failure of the United Nations and the failure of world leaders. If the UK Prime Minister cannot even stand up and condemn the actions of the Modi government, then there is something wrong. There is something wrong with our world. And, that needs to be looked at within a big issue.
Of course, of course. Okay, Anthea, do you think that after abrogation of Articles 370 and 35A, international community has responded effectively to Indian aggression and reoccupation?
Not at the higher levels, not at our world government levels, not at the United
Sorry, Claire, I want to
sorry.
ask to Anthea, if you hear my question.
I think I have to start by just going back to what Soraya was saying.
Mm-hmm.
When I talk about terrorism, I'm talking about ISIS, I'm talking about bin Laden, I'm talking about Al-Qaeda. Now, if any country is identified as harboring those terrorists, Hezbollah, I suspect you might have different views to me on Hezbollah and Hamas, but I don't think that any responsible citizen and any responsible government should make excuses for any organizations like that. And I think while Pakistan is being accused of harboring terrorists, I'm not talking about Kashmir. I'm talking about what it is being accused of by India in particular. It would be much better if Pakistan could put its defense in place and explain why India is wrong. I don't think it's good enough just to say, well, we're all right, it's all your fault, because that's what countries tend to do. And I think countries should be much more circumspect in their claims. So I think that the way to solve the problem is much more by recognizing that there are faults all around and let's correct them, rather than by, I suppose, just megaphone diplomacy where everyone shouts from their own side. So that's where I'm approaching it from. Clearly, the world isn't doing enough, but I also, it may not be what the people of Kashmir want to hear, but there are other countries where things are just as bad. Soraya has mentioned the plight of the Palestinians, and certainly I've visited the occupied territories there, and I understand what she's saying. But look at Iran. The people of Iran are suffering desperately under the government there. So you have to accept, I think, that there are regimes around the world that are not living up to a fundamental grasp of human rights at all. And so everyone is vying for the attention of the world. And somehow it can't be the person that shouts the loudest that gets the attention. I think that the United Nations needs to do much more in encouraging countries around the world to take much more interest in human rights and to play a much larger part, to make human rights much more important in the way we do business around the world. So, and I have not in any way said that Britain doesn't bear responsibility and isn't a part of this. Of course, I accept that. And I accept that it goes back to partition. The point I was making was that if we want to resolve it, it's much more likely to be resolved by looking forward than looking backward and saying, well, it's all Britain's fault, they ought to sort it out. I don't think Britain can sort it out. It's an international problem, and I think that the whole world needs to get involved, and I think we ought to grasp the opportunity that COVID-19 has given. And what that has done for us is actually make us communicate much more around the world. We've each realized, each country has realized that we can't exist in isolation, that we are dependent upon other countries. And for example, working together to get a vaccine is something that is positive. Now, I've just been involved in a conference with South Africa, with Southern African countries participating. with European countries. I think that the willingness for people to communicate around the world and to be part of a much more international community is positive. We have to persuade America to be more international as well, because for them, I'm afraid that the world kind of stops at the edge of the Atlantic. They don't seem to see beyond sometimes. But I think that, again, the way is not by attacking countries. The way is by attacking particular actions, by attacking. I mean, it's very clear that we ought to be attacking the abuse of human rights by India in Kashmir. We should be deploring the use of pellet guns. I mean, pellet guns itself is a euphemism. These are shotguns with real bullets, with real lead pellets that are blinding and maiming small children. Of course, we should be shouting about that. But I think that the more people that we can get to condemn those sorts of issues and work to resolving it, the better. And I also think, in the case of Kashmir, that the fact that we have 2 nuclear powers on the
three
nuclear powers. You're right, 3 nuclear powers. Ought to be another reason that the world takes notice of what's going on in Kashmir, because, again, I think that one of the things that has resulted from COVID-19 is quite a feeling of insecurity around the world. Everyone has been affected in some way and realizes that, we are all a part of this. There's like John Donne said, no man is an island alone unto himself. We're all a part of the main. And I think that is what we have to persuade countries to do, to come together to defeat human rights abuses.
Thank you so much. I think Soraya want to comment on your statement. Just briefly, Soraya, then I ask you next question, please.
Sure. So, of course, Anthea, I wasn't referring to you specifically mentioning acts in relation to terrorism, and particularly specific reference to Pakistan. I was simply saying that if there is any terrorism, it is the one that is state sanctioned by the government of Modi against the people of Kashmir, an essentially defenseless civilian population. That is what I was saying. And the same thing as Israel. I mean, by and large, even if there is an armed wing, and whether it is Hezbollah or whatever, I would like to say thank God for Hezbollah, because without Hezbollah, the Middle East would be probably by now Greater Israel. So even though they don't have the same military edge, they certainly did defeat Israel in 2006. And God knows through the cluster bombs, which were actually banned, but according to Lord Trisman at the time, were actually legal, particularly because he considered them to be legally lawful in regards to humanitarian intervention. How he factored that in, I have no understanding of how his brain works. Anyhow, so what I wanted to say also is that the UN is doing what the UN can. It has been consciously impeded, debilitated by mostly the 5 permanent members, and specifically America. Just as Trump defunded UNRWA, and just as Trump had the audacity to propose the deal of the century, which put even more responsibility on the shoulders of Palestinians, where when it comes to privileges and the rights associated with that, these were gifted questions no asked to Israel. So we need to be measured in the sense that we need to maintain a sense of balance in the manner which we articulate facts. Now, the other thing that I was going to say is when it comes to sanctions, these were readily imposed on Russia, on Iraq, and on Iran. Now, none of them had taken part in international conflicts, unlike America, in Iraq, and in Syria, and in Libya, etc., and Afghanistan. Okay, so all I said is very much qualified.
Okay,
and
so
very much in relation to.
Soraya, what mechanism could be applied to resolve the Kashmir and Palestine conflict? Do you have any resolution model for it?
Yes, I think the Good Friday Agreement, I think the Truth and Reconciliation process in South Africa, which included everyone, which talked about the past in order to arrive at the present so as to move forward in terms of the future with regard to the political aspiration, which would be a reflection of the will of the people. And clearly, we need to do that in Israel, and clearly, we need to do that in occupied Palestine, and we need to do that in occupied Kashmir.
That's fine. Actually, everybody talking about the United Nations resolutions. I come to you, Claire, again. What mechanism would you apply to resolve the Kashmir conflict? Implementation of United Nations resolution, or do you have any other roadmap for it?
I agree with what Anthea and Soraya have been saying, you know, with like the Good Friday Agreement, if we can get somebody to work within them. I mean, what we're doing, we have a petition that's going round, and what we want to see happen is for the United Nations to really get a hold of this and to work towards a plebiscite for Kashmir according to the resolutions back in 1948, and to basically to send in a task force, an international task force, remove the troops from Kashmir and oversee a plebiscite and give the plebiscite and stay as long as they have to until, you know, that peace is within there. I mean, I find it interesting that, you know, you've got the line of control there. The line of control itself is referred to as a ceasefire line. I can't understand why there is a war zone along what's meant to be a ceasefire line. So that in itself is a big question that United Nations should be looking at. There's just, I feel there was things I was going to say. The other thing that we are up against and needs to be stopped, and I don't know how, is there is obviously a power, a lobbying power from the BJP government or from the Indian lobby that is infiltrating through our systems. So people are having their Twitter accounts locked. People are losing access to their Facebook accounts if they mention a freedom fighter, because under the terms in the West, the narrative is that they're terrorists. But, you know, so we need to change the narrative. But it's not, like I say, it's not in our mainstream newspapers. It's not on the BBC channels because, you know, why? You know, these are huge human rights abuses, atrocities, the illegal occupation. Something somewhere is stopping this from coming out into the mainstream, which makes me then look at the bigger issue of the money, the funding, and going back to, I think it was Soraya that mentioned it, probably both Anthea as well, that we are running a world system that is more about economy than it is about human rights. So I think it's recognizing there's challenges there at all levels. But for me, it was bringing more people to make, you know, get the United Nations to open their eyes and do what they're meant to be doing. They were put there by the world so that we didn't return to like the Holocaust, the genocides of that time. And it's failing. And it's failing because the key country members and all the country members aren't enforcing it to act. So for me, you know, like I said, we're building up a network with other groups and things around the world to just try and put the pressure from the people on our governments to get the United Nations to get a hold of this situation. You know, like I say, troops out and plebiscite. And if we could unite all pro-Kashmiri groups for that, that's what we're trying to do, and that is our attempt at a solution.
Of course. And yeah, I would compare Hong Kong was China and compare that to British response to Kashmir. Hong Kong Treaty is getting full UK support, but no support on Kashmir Treaty.
I think you have to accept that the circumstances are different, and the history of Hong Kong is a very different one from the history of Kashmir. But that doesn't mean to say I don't think that Britain has a responsibility in Kashmir too. So I just don't think it's going to be, I don't think the people of Kashmir want to be able to come to Britain because they have links there. I don't think that's going to help, which is pretty much what we've done so far with Hong Kong. I still come back to the fact that I do see a greater role for the UN. But it's also very easy to put the blame on India, for example, purely on the Modi government. And I'm not sure that's right. I do think that in the UK, the fact that we managed to have the Good Friday Agreement and to see peace in Northern Ireland is an enormous achievement. And I do see similarities and parallels between Northern Ireland and Kashmir. And I have to say, I've been to the Parliament in New Delhi, and I have sat in committees with members of Parliament there and said as much to them. And I said, look, why can't we resolve the issue of Kashmir in the same way that we approached Northern Ireland? And before I go on, let me say I absolutely agree with Soraya on the way that South Africa got from where it was to where it is. It is quite remarkable. And I spend a lot of time in South Africa, and I think it's a fabulous country. And I think their approach to the past and the future has been quite amazing. And I think that's what, so I agree with you. But to come back to the Indian Parliament, when I raised this and said, look, can we just discuss Kashmir? All parties, not just BJP, but the whole lot, absolutely shut down and refused to discuss it at all. So I'm afraid that it's not necessarily one government or another. And I also have to tell you that I got into real trouble with the European Commission because I dared to raise it. And I found that quite staggering because, I mean, the Commission are there. They, the High Representative, all of the European representation around the world, they said, oh, you've really damaged Europe's ability to negotiate with India. And basically I told them what I thought, because I'm there as a democratically elected member. I can raise whatever I like, and it's an issue that actually is quite important to some of my constituents. But so there is a lot of institutional objection, institutional barriers that we have to overcome as well.
I can understand actually, if we talk about the United Kingdom, your party, Conservative Party, is in power. Can you please tell us the reason why your party policies on Kashmir is unclear?
I think that the short answer is I don't actually know what the current Conservative policy is on Kashmir. We've had a change of leadership, if not a change of government, and I'm no longer privy to those sorts of discussions. But I think that the Conservative Party certainly, it is a supporter of human rights and all of the rest of it. So don't think that they're not prepared to stand up for human rights. But they are also always very circumspect in what they will say and do on the world stage. They're very reticent to get into, I think, difficult waters, if you like. So, but then, if you look at individual members of Parliament, we've got the all-party group on Kashmir. Jack Brereton, who's from my region, is Conservative, and you've got various others. I think Debbie Abrahams is another one. So it's all party support for Kashmir, and I think each of the members of Parliament puts pressure on their own party to say and do something. But it's always the case that the governing party has a sort of sense of responsibility which the opposition doesn't have. So the opposition can be much more critical and can call for much more in the way of action than the governing party ever can.
Thank you so much. Actually, we are talking about the practical steps. So, Soraya, are the United Nations and the international community serious about resolving the Kashmir issue? What do you think about?
I think at the moment, as I have endeavored to convey, at the moment there is a tendency to favor investment and trade over human rights and the rule of law and the upholding of all international non-derogatory legal norms. But certainly I return to the UN, because the UN is an extraordinary organ. And of course, the UN ought to be able to function and deliver its mandate, just as the European Commission, just as the European Union, just as every other democratic system of governance. All of them claim to uphold universal human rights. All of them claim to endorse the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Now, the declaration says that since we are born free and equal, I submit that we should therefore all live free as equals. And the thing that I want to add is that obviously the plebiscite, that is our first goal, is to enable all Kashmiris to exercise their free will as to which direction they wish to exercise their political aspiration. The problem with the resolution is that it says either Pakistan or Kashmir. Nonetheless, once the plebiscite has taken place, then I think there is room to incorporate a third way, namely total independence and total restitution of all of the territories. So I'm talking about full territorial contiguity all over Kashmir, and that includes Jammu, Azad Kashmir, Indian occupied Kashmir, Gilgit-Baltistan, the other area that's occupied by China, the is it called Akasai? I can never pronounce it properly.
Aksai.
Yes, thank you. So all of those territory, they're all to be reintegrated, restituted, so as to form a complete integrity, so as to have territorial integrity. Then the officially democratically elected government can go about as it pleases in terms of the governance of the whole landmass, and to devise the economic policies, the trade policies, and whatever other policies it so chooses, as do all other democratic systems of governance. So plebiscite first, and the third way, i.e. independence from Pakistan and from India.
Thank you. Thank you so much. My last question to you, Claire. Is the world aware of the persecution in Indian occupied Kashmir? What does your experience say?
I don't think I think the awareness is growing. Without a doubt, it's growing, but I don't think it is anywhere near as aware as it should be. No. To pick up on what Anthea said, there's the positive at the moment with COVID times. People have been stuck within their homes. They've been on social media. So we've been able to reach and share that across, a broader perspective. I think what concerns me is that it's things like, the political prisoners that are only in prison because, it's undemocratic. They've been arrested for standing up and speaking their voice. And so there's human suffering in that way that I think if the world community knew, again, they could put pressure to get these people released. And it seems to be, anybody that's standing up, the freedom of the press in Kashmir, it's just clamped down all the time. So no, my honest thing is that I don't think the world is as aware yet, which is a positive thing, because the more aware it becomes, the more power we bring to the people to put on our parliaments, to put on our governments, to put onto UN. So, it's very encouraging the way everybody's working from the grassroots level, the parliamentary level, they're just the power there, and at the governments, the Kashmiri diaspora, everybody is working so hard. And this 70 years wait of torture and pain is at least coming together, and it is ready to erupt in a big, tsunami wave. And I think that's the hope probably of all of us here, that, that is going to come to the fore, and this will resolve, and it will resolve soon.
hopefully. The peoples of Kashmir demands following the discriminatory laws like AFSP Act, Public Safety Act should be abolished. The population centers of Indian occupied Kashmir be demilitarized immediately. Demographic changes are not acceptable in any part of Kashmir. Kashmiri should be given the right of self-determination as per United Nations resolution. Okay, thank you so much, Anthea, Claire, Soraya, for joining us today. Thank you, viewers, for watching our program. We will appreciate your feedback. Keep watching WNTV. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Goodbye.